the introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to give you a little bit of perspective on where we see the future of workplace. A little bit, for those of you who don't know who Hayworth is, we are a furniture manufacturer focused primarily in workplace. And we do a significant amount of research to understand the future of work, so it's a really nice and honest time in being able to come in here today. A little bit of context. I am a child of the 80s, I was born in 1974, so my vision of the future was shaped by media around me. I started out thinking it was all going to be about folding up cars and briefcases and the Jetsons. Eventually was influenced more by Marty McFly and his perspective on where the future was going to be. Got scared to death by The Matrix. And more recently, for those of you that have seen Ready Player One, it felt a little bit better. If the future is going to be based on 80s pop culture references, I should be okay. So, but in terms of trying to understand the future of work, I think what's most important is it is about work itself. And in order to look forward, I think we do need to take a step back and think a little bit about where we've come from. Because a lot of what we've learned through the past and through research is yet we haven't figured out a way of discovering how to implement it effectively yet. So, as I mentioned, Hayworth does a lot of research, and over the last 20 or so years, we've been putting together this framework on affordances. Affordances are the properties of objects or space that encourage behavior or support behavior. And when we talk about it in the context of workplace, it's really what we should expect of our workplaces. Or if you're more a glass half empty kind of person, it's what we shouldn't expect. We should not expect to feel like this poor soul here. If anybody's ever been in a situation at work where they felt like this person, chances are you're not in your best place. Your space is not likely helping you. You may have some issues with your job. But what we want to be able to explore is how can we make space support us more effectively in terms of the behaviors that we're aspiring to. The framework itself is quite robust. As I mentioned, it's over 20 years of research. I have, I think, 10 minutes or so to go, so buckle up. I'm going to do my best to paint a couple of themes that I think actually connect really nicely to what we started hearing earlier today, in terms of how space can really go to support how we're expected to unlock our future capabilities. The framework itself is broken down quite simply into 3 different categories. We have physical affordances, emotional affordances, and cognitive affordances. Physical being how we're supported physically, emotionally getting to more of a psychological level, and cognitive being how we're able to do our mind's best work. And so within each one of these, I'll touch on a couple of the affordances and a couple of principles to give you a sense of some thematic elements that I think are really important for us to consider moving forward. When it comes to physical affordances, there are 3. We have anthropometrics, we have ambience, and we have movement. The first 2 are pretty easy, anthropometrics and ambience. How many people here are studying design currently, interior design? I know there's probably many of you in the audience. We had a book we had to buy when I was in school called Human Dimensions in Interior Space. That tells you all your anthropometric data. That tells you what your height of your stool should be relative to your countertop, what your reach should be, all of those sorts of dimensional logics that we are as humans. So we don't feel a need to really go into that in great depth today. Ambients are quite similar. We work with many consultants to understand things like the quality of light or air quality or acoustics. So that's really encompassing how we can better support things from an ambient nature. The one point I want to talk about is movement. When it comes to movement, the affordance of movement breaks down into 3 different principles: activity-based, interaction, and physiology. The one in particular that I think is important to start out this conversation with, though, is physiology. Because over the last number of years, there's been a lot of media and a lot of press on a specific subject. How many of you have seen this article before? Sitting is the new smoking, right? How many of you actually read the article? Be honest. How many of you read the arguments to and for and against and all of those different things? So the whole concept of sitting is the new smoking has really come into the vernacular in the last number of years. In particular, we've been supported through different devices and gadgets that tell us to get up every 45 minutes. As I was sitting in the first part, my watch went off and said, you should stand up, right? So we know inactive physiology, which is really what the science is behind it, is something that's important. If you sit in a sedentary position for an extended period of time, you will not be able to undo the negative impacts of that by doing an hour of yoga at the end of the day. Now, we think this is a new idea because it's hit us in the mainstream in the last couple of years. As we started to do research on this framework, the earliest studies that we began to find dated back to the 1950s in London, where they studied the difference between conductors and bus drivers to understand what we know now to be true, that being sedentary is not good for you. The reason I point this out is because it's only taken us 60 years to figure out how to start implementing it into workplace. Only 60 years. So when we think of the future of work in the context of this framework, I'm not here to say that there's going to be a whole bunch of radical new ideas to introduce, but what I would suggest is that we haven't figured out how to actually implement them effectively yet. The second category that we have are emotional affordances, and you can feel free to give a big ah. It's a very sad picture, if not, you're cold, heartless people. But the three different categories we have here are affinity, authenticity, and well-being. I'm going to touch on a couple of them here, and I'm going to start off with well-being, and this was something that was brought up through a couple of the sessions this morning, or earlier today. Well-being is, again, a hot topic for many organizations and many of us trying to come to terms with things like work-life balance and how we can be healthier. A lot of it is around different organizational policies, around providing healthier lunch or healthier access to food, things of that nature. The thing that I think gets lost in the well-being conversation today, though, is autonomy. The freedom to do what you want, where you want, how you want, when you want, where you want, without fear of retribution from your boss. It's great to say that you can do yoga at lunch, or you can bike into work and then take a shower and come in a little bit later. But if your boss is standing there overlooking you, and you don't feel comfortable to be able to actually take advantage of those programs, then you've lost the point of these wellness initiatives. The point of this is really to better understand how we need to think about policy. Space can be designed. We can come up with all the greatest ideas for spaces that you have the autonomy to choose between, but if we don't have policies that support that and leadership that supports that, then it's a bit of a lost cause. The second point I want to talk to within emotional affordances is that of affinity. So affinity is about being drawn in together, drawn naturally to interact with others. So we have principles of belonging, engagement, interaction, how space can help foster all of these things. The last one there, though, is organizational culture. And culture was brought up a number of times this morning. I think one thing that's important to think about when it comes to organizational culture, there's a couple of different angles here that I want to explore. The first one is that when we talk about change in the way we work and thinking to the future, we have to be really cognizant of where we are today and where as different organizations exist today culturally. Because implementing new strategies on a workplace are only as good as their authenticity to the current state of culture. To be able to put in all these radical new ideas in space go right out the window again if it's not authentic to where the culture is today. So that's one point to it. The second point I want to bring out is around how organizational culture and space tie together, especially as it relates to things like collaboration. So a couple of times collaboration was mentioned, and in the panel itself talks about a couple of different modes of collaboration. Daniel Middleman in 2008 started publishing on various modes of collaboration, and he brought out these four. These four in particular align very strongly with many organizational culture frameworks, including ones that we've done a lot of research with. And the point here being is that when you talk about collaboration being a key to unlocking our future potential and how we work together, what's important to understand is what are the current state of cultures within and subcultures that exist within organizations, and then how can you help them collaborate most effectively. We have different modes in which we collaborate depending on our culture and depending on our need. And so being able to think of these four as a bit of a framework and beginning to understand the nuance between the different types of cultures and cultural implications can go a long way to making us more successful as we look at implications in space. The last category are cognitive, so in how we think. And if I had more time, I'd go very in-depth in here, because this is one of the areas that we find often when presenting this framework that we've really lost our way when it comes to workplace in the last couple of decades. The four here, we have access, installation, externalization, and embedding. Access is about knowing where your people are at and where your things are at. So when you think about a lot of policy that's beginning to roll out when it comes to unassigned environments, what often gets lost is that might be counterintuitive to the majority of people in an organization. Knowing where and how easily you can access people and resources is really critical for the success of how people currently work and how you transition them. Installation is about being able to control stimuli, whether you're talking about internal stimuli, you're thinking about what's for dinner, what time you have to pick up the kids, those sorts of things that your brain just goes off on tangents on, or looking at how the space itself impacts external stimuli and how we can help control things like that. Externalization is about getting your ideas out there. When you're able to effectively get your ideas out there, and I'm not just talking visually, I'm talking in an auditory way. How many people here, by show of hands, like to think out loud, or at least understand what that means? How many of you get dirty looks when you do that in an open office environment? Right? You're talking to me? Oh, okay, you do your thing, right? I can't tell you how many times in preparing for today, I rehearsed this over and over again in my car rides on the way to and from work, in opportunities in the office itself, because I do fortunately have spaces that allow me to do that. But we're talking about being able to mode switch. It's being able to go from hearing things to seeing things to writing things down to hearing it come out of your own voice. All of these modes are really important towards unlocking our potential. The last one, though, I wanted to touch on today especially was embedding. Embedding is the affordance of being able to help have artifacts and objects that are going to help us recall, remind us, be persistent, or help us offload. Our brains only have a certain finite capacity. And in order to effectively do the work we need to do and think, we need to think of ways of affording back to workers and employees these core principles. I wanted to bring this one up today specifically because of where we are. We are in a lecture hall. Not too dissimilar from this one. We don't have a horse, which is unfortunate. I think that would have added a lot, but this is what we're talking about. So studies have begun to show, or have been showing over time, that students do better on exams when they write them in the classrooms they were taught in, right? And so when you start to think of this and apply that kind of principle to how we collaborate or how we work, imagine, if you will, you had a meeting, a collaborative session that ended Friday at 5 o'clock. And then Monday morning, you knew you had to get back together, but you know what, that room was booked. So you have to go to the other floor, the other side, facing a different orientation within the room. The room doesn't have quite enough chairs, but don't worry, you'll find some extra chairs and pull them in there. All those notes and all that whiteboarding and all the externalizing that you did, well, you'll take pictures and you'll try to figure out how to bring it back to life. And you can see where I'm going with this. Imagine then if you could actually just come back to the same room, the same time on Monday morning, and be able to sit in the same spots. You'd actually arguably be able to pick up where you left off. We lose a lot when we don't have the opportunity to embed, because embed is about the context of the space itself. Let's get this going. The environment itself, the visual cues. If you were to all come back here in a week or in 2 weeks or whatever, try to remember the content that you heard today, and you sat in the same chairs you're sitting in now, I would argue that you would have a better chance of remembering the things that you heard here today. Why? Because you're looking at me and you're seeing this detail, you're seeing little random odds of details and artifacts within the room that are going to help you recall what it is you hear today. So being able to have the context of the environment is really critical to helping us recall information and uncover, see the unseen. So why do I believe this is all the future? Well, we have been going through quite a pendulum swing when it comes to workplace since the beginning of the modern workplace. We went from open environments to completely closed. We then introduced panels and started to lower the panels and then eventually get rid of the panels, and we're sort of back to where we started. But I believe that as members of society and as consumers, we are now landing somewhere in the middle. And when I think of what we expect of our workplaces, our expectations is this. It's freedom. We expect to get Amazon Prime to deliver it here by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We expect to be able to get our half-calf, triple-fat, soy, whatever kind of latte you're going to get at the end of the day today. We have really high expectations as consumers, and that needs to translate into how we look at workplace. So when I look at workplace, and we look at workplace of the future, variety is starting to get into the conversation, but I would argue what we need to do is get into much more meaningful variety. Nuanced variety that actually has research and foundations of strategy behind it, that's supported by policy and supported by the way the organization currently has cultural values and is looking to transform, and to do it in an authentic way. Because regardless of whether you think you're going to be the Jetsons in the future, or you're going to be plugged into the Matrix, or you're going to be influenced by Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and what their version of the future was and those other two, the affordance framework itself can help tremendously in terms of giving us some idea and some values to be able to design towards, to help us be better at what we want to do in the future. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Yoel. I'm going to invite Mason to join us.